My wife's dark secret, the night I unmasked her. I've been married to my wife, Jenny, for almost 10 years now. From the outside, our marriage probably looked perfect. We've got decent jobs, a nice house, and no kids yet, so we've had plenty of time for each other. But lately, things haven't felt right. I'd say it started about 6 months ago. Jenny's always been a bit of a free spirit, super independent, and I've always admired that about her. But suddenly, she became too distant. Like, she'd stop sharing little things about her day, she'd laugh off my questions with vague answers or a quick kiss to brush me off. At first, I didn't think much of it, everyone has their off days, right? But then it got worse. Her phone, which used to be left casually on the counter, became practically glued to her hand. She started going out more frequently, telling me she was catching up with friends from work or doing girls' nights. I trusted her, we'd been together for a long time, and I had no reason not to. But deep down, I could feel something was shifting, something was wrong. And that's when the late night started. She'd say she was working overtime or staying late at the gym, but there were times she'd come home hours after she said she would, and her excuses just didn't add up. I wanted to believe her so badly, but I could feel a knot tightening in my chest every time she walked through the door. That intuition that something was happening behind my back was becoming impossible to ignore. But it was just the beginning, and I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole would go. So, things were already feeling off between us, but I kept telling myself that I was just being paranoid, that maybe I was overthinking. But, you know that gut feeling you get when something's just wrong? Yeah, I couldn't shake it. And then, one night, I found my first real sign. It was late, way later than Jenny said she'd be home. She told me she was having dinner with some coworkers, but by 11 p.m., she still wasn't back. I tried calling her, no answer. Texted, nothing. I was sitting on the couch, just staring at my phone, feeling this weird, sinking feeling in my stomach. Around midnight, she finally came home. She looked flushed, like she'd been rushing, and when I asked why she hadn't answered her phone, she gave me this really weak excuse about her battery dying. I didn't say much that night, but something clicked in me. That wasn't like her. The Jenny I knew would never leave me hanging like that. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my trust was starting to crumble. The next day, I decided to go through her phone. I'm not proud of this, I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who snoops through his wife's stuff. But I was desperate for some answers. And, honestly, I didn't find much at first. Jenny was good, too good. All her messages were either deleted or so casual that they didn't raise any red flags. But then I found a receipt in her purse. It was from a bar I knew she didn't frequent, and it was for the same night she said she'd been with her coworkers. My heart sank. It wasn't proof, not really, but it was enough to make me question everything. I decided to wait. I wanted to see if she would slip up again. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe I was blowing this all out of proportion. But I couldn't get that receipt out of my mind. It was like a ticking time bomb, waiting to go off. And the bomb did go off, but not in the way I expected. The more I started to notice things, the more little lies stacked up, the more I realized that my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for years, was hiding something. Something big. After finding that bar receipt, I couldn't let it go. You know that feeling when something starts gnawing at you? It was like that, but 100 times worse. I was trying to convince myself that it didn't mean anything, that maybe she went with friends and didn't tell me because she knew I'd overreact. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. It wasn't just the receipt. There were so many little things that, looking back now, should have screamed at me. Like how she'd started dressing differently, more makeup, more revealing clothes. At first, I thought maybe she just wanted to feel good about herself. But then it was like she was putting on a show, and the audience wasn't me. One night, when she was in the shower, I sat in our bedroom and just stared at her closet. I had this feeling like I didn't even know the woman I was living with anymore. Her new outfits hung there like clues to a puzzle I didn't want to solve. She wasn't the Jenny I knew, the one who used to steal my hoodies and wear them around the house. This version of her was almost like someone else entirely. It wasn't just her clothes though. Jenny had started going out a lot. She always had an excuse: dinners with friends, gym sessions, or work functions. But every time she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was heading somewhere she didn't want me to know about. That's when I started asking myself the hard questions: was she seeing someone? Could she really be cheating on me? Every time I even thought about it, I felt sick to my stomach. It was like my entire world was being turned upside down. But still, I wasn't ready to confront her, not without something solid. I needed more than a gut feeling or a stupid receipt. I needed proof. Then, a few weeks later, the opportunity fell right into my lap. Jenny had another one of her nights out planned, and this time I decided I wasn't going to sit at home feeling like a fool. I told her I was working late, that I wouldn't be home until after midnight. The truth? I wasn't working. I was watching her, from a distance. I followed her. And where did she go? That same bar. But she wasn't meeting her coworkers. She was meeting someone else. Alright, so here's where things really start to unravel. After the night I followed Jenny to that bar, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had barely scratched the surface. I needed more answers, but I wasn't sure how to get them without tipping her off. I didn't want to confront her just yet, not without more proof. But I also couldn't sit around and pretend like everything was normal. A few nights later, my buddy Mike hit me up, asking if I wanted to grab a drink. I almost said no because, honestly, I wasn't in the mood to socialize. But then I thought, why not? A few drinks could help clear my head, and maybe it'd give me a chance to vent without spilling everything to him just yet. So, we ended up going to this bar across town. Not the same one I had followed Jenny to, but a similar type of place: low lighting, loud music, and a lot of people just trying to let loose. We grabbed a booth, ordered some beers, and I tried to relax. For a little while, it worked. Mike was rambling on about work, and I was starting to think maybe this was exactly what I needed. Just a normal night out with a friend. But then, as we were sitting there, something caught my eye. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I was staring at the dance floor, and in the middle of the crowd, I saw a woman who looked exactly like Jenny. My heart stopped. It couldn't be her. She said she was working late that night, and this bar wasn't even close to where she claimed she'd be. But there she was, dancing like she didn't have a care in the world, surrounded by a group of guys who were watching her like she was the only woman in the room. The way she moved, the way she laughed, it was her. No doubt about it. I felt like I'd been sucker punched. "Hey, man, you good?" Mike asked, clearly noticing the shift in my mood. I didn't even answer him. My eyes were glued to Jenny, and suddenly, everything around me seemed to fade away. She was dancing, but it wasn't just casual. It was... I don't know how to describe it. Almost like she was performing. It felt wrong, like I was seeing a side of her I'd never known existed. Then, out of nowhere, she grabbed one of the guys by the hand and started leading him toward a back hallway. That's when I saw it, a door at the end of the hallway with a neon sign above it. I couldn't read what it said, but the moment she pushed that door open and disappeared inside, I knew something was off. I got up from the table without thinking. Mike was like, "Where the hell are you going?" but I couldn't stop. I had to know what was going on. I made my way across the bar, pushing through the crowd, and followed her to the hallway. But just as I got close to that door, a security guy stepped in front of me. "Private room," he said, his voice like a brick wall. "Can't go in there." I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. "The woman who just went in, that's my wife." He didn't even flinch. "Sorry, man. Can't help you. I was shaking. I wanted to shove him aside, bust through that door, and see for myself what the hell was going on. But the way he stood there, arms crossed like he'd done this 1,000 times before, I knew I wasn't getting past him. So, I did the only thing I could do. I left. I walked back to the table where Mike was sitting, looking at me like I'd lost my mind, and without a word, I grabbed my coat and told him I was heading home. I don't even remember what excuse I gave him, something about not feeling well, but I didn't care. The whole ride home, my mind was spinning. What was she doing in there? Who was that guy? And what kind of place had private rooms, with bouncers blocking the door? That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing that whatever I thought I knew about Jenny, it was worse than I ever could have imagined. After that night, I couldn't get the image of Jenny dancing with that guy out of my head. The way she moved, the way she disappeared into that back room like she'd done it 1,000 times before, it haunted me. But what really got to me was how normal she acted the next day. Like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, talked about her busy day at work, and even asked me what I wanted for dinner. I felt like I was living in a parallel universe, where everything looked the same but nothing felt right. I wanted to confront her. God, did I want to ask her straight up what the hell she was doing that night? But every time I opened my mouth, the words just disappeared. Maybe it was fear that once I said it out loud, there'd be no going back. Or maybe I was holding on to this tiny, foolish hope that I was wrong, that it was all in my head. But it wasn't. The next week, everything happened again, almost like a sick, twisted replay of the first time. Mike and I went back to the same bar. Honestly, I didn't want to, but I also couldn't stay away. Something inside me needed to know if that night was a one-time thing or if there was more to it. And sure enough, there she was. Same bar. Same dance floor. Only this time, she wasn't with the same guy. No, this time it was someone different. A younger guy, maybe in his late 20s, tall, athletic-looking, with that cocky grin that I instantly hated. I watched them from the booth, my hands gripping the edge of the table so hard I thought I might snap the wood. It was like déjà vu. Jenny was laughing, dancing close to him, letting him wrap his arm around her waist like they were old friends, or more than friends. Every now and then, she'd toss her hair over her shoulder, flashing that smile I used to think was just for me. But now, I could see it was all an act. A performance. I didn't say a word to Mike. I don't even think he noticed how tense I'd become, too lost in whatever story he was telling me. But my focus was locked on her. I watched as she danced with this new guy, her hands roaming over his chest in a way that felt too intimate, too familiar. Then, just like before, she led him toward that same back hallway. I stood up without thinking, determined to get there before she disappeared behind that door again. But when I got to the hallway, that same security guard from last time was there. He recognized me immediately, stepping in front of the door before I even got close. "Not this again," he said, shaking his head like I was some drunk idiot trying to start trouble. "Look, man," I started, trying to keep my voice steady even though I was boiling inside. "I just want to know what's going on in there. That's my wife." But he didn't care. Just like last time, he crossed his arms and stared me down. "I already told you. Private room. You can't go in." I was shaking, my fists clenched at my sides. I wanted to scream, to break past him and barge through that door to drag her out, but I knew it wouldn't get me anywhere. I was stuck, watching my life unravel from the outside. So, I did what I did the last time. I turned around and walked out. But this time, it wasn't just the anger gnawing at me. It was the realization that this wasn't a one-off thing. This was a pattern. A routine. And it wasn't just about one guy. She was doing this with different men, going to the same place, dancing, disappearing into that room. And who knows what else. That drive home was torture. My head was spinning with questions I didn't have the answers to. How long had this been going on? How many times had she done this? And why did she feel like she could keep getting away with it? But more than anything, I wanted to know what was happening in that room. What the hell was she hiding from me? I couldn't take much more of this. Something had to give. And soon. I couldn't take it anymore. Watching Jenny from the shadows, seeing her dance with strangers like it meant nothing, knowing she was lying to my face day after day, it was tearing me apart. I had tried to brush it off, tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. Something was seriously wrong, and I needed answers. So, I decided to do something I never thought I'd have to do. I had to confront her, but not in the way she'd expect. I didn't want a shouting match at home where she could twist things or dodge my questions. No, this time I needed to catch her in the act, really catch her. And I had an idea of how to do just that. I called the bar ahead of time. This place was sketchy, and I figured they offered more than just drinks and dancing. Sure enough, after a bit of back and forth on the phone, I found out they had private rooms where you could order personal dances. The same rooms Jenny had been disappearing into for weeks now. That's when the plan started to form. I'd go to the bar, but not as myself. I'd wear a mask, book one of those private rooms, and wait for her to come in. I needed to see her up close, without her knowing it was me. I had to know exactly what she was doing in there. That night, I put on a simple black mask, the kind that covered most of my face, leaving only my eyes visible. I arrived at the bar early, my heart pounding in my chest the entire time. I could barely hear anything over the rush of blood in my ears, but I was committed. This was it. When I got to the door, the same security guy I'd encountered twice already was standing there. This time, though, I wasn't trying to fight my way in. I gave him my name, told him I had a private dance booked, and he waved me through without a second glance. My nerves were on fire, but I kept moving. The room they led me to was dimly lit, with a low sofa against one wall and a small table in front of it. The air smelled like cheap perfume and cigarettes, and there was a strange, eerie quietness to the space that made my skin crawl. I sat down, leaning back into the shadows, my mask firmly in place. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. And there she was, my wife, Jenny, walking in with that same confidence I'd seen so many times on the dance floor. She had no idea it was me waiting for her behind the mask. She looked different. The Jenny I knew at home wasn't like this. She was a performer here, playing a part, and it made my stomach turn. She didn't even hesitate. She walked into the room, closing the door softly behind her, and without a word, she began undressing. Slowly. Like she had done this 100 times before. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look conflicted. She looked completely in control. I sat there, watching, feeling every ounce of betrayal sinking deeper into my chest. As she moved closer to me, she started dancing, her eyes half closed, lost in the performance. She thought she was putting on a show for some random man, someone who was here to enjoy it. But it wasn't some stranger sitting there in the shadows. It was her husband. When she finished her dance, she walked over to the sofa where I sat, wearing nothing but a thin, lacy piece of lingerie. She climbed onto the edge of the seat, moving closer to me, her hands brushing my knees. Then, without a word, she leaned forward, reaching out like she was ready for things to go further. But that's when I stopped her. I stood up, my heart pounding harder than it ever had before, and slowly removed my mask. The look on her face when she realized it was me, her husband, was priceless. She froze, her eyes wide, her body going stiff. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just looked at her, the weight of everything crushing me all at once. "Well, Jenny," I said, my voice cold, "there's not going to be a continuation, because I've already seen enough. I know what you've been doing here, and I can only imagine how dirty you must feel." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, but no words came out. For the first time, she had nothing to say. No excuses. No lies. Just the raw truth hanging in the air between us, suffocating. I turned, leaving her standing there in that dim room, as the reality of what I'd just uncovered hit her full force. I didn't need to stay and hear whatever pathetic explanation she would try to come up with. I'd seen everything I needed to. After I left that room, the weight of what had just happened hit me like a truck. My whole body felt heavy, like I'd been punched in the gut. I stepped out of the bar, into the cold night air, and just stood there for a moment, trying to breathe. The sounds of the bar, the music, the laughter, they all faded away, and it was just me, standing alone with the truth. I had finally seen it for myself. Everything I had been suspecting for weeks was real. Jenny wasn't just hiding something. She was living an entirely different life when I wasn't around, a life that I wasn't a part of at all. Walking away from her in that room, leaving her speechless and exposed, felt good in a way. But it didn't make the pain any easier. All those years of marriage, of trust, of thinking I knew the woman I had built a life with, it was all a lie. And now, there was no going back. I got into my car and sat there for what felt like forever. I couldn't bring myself to drive home. Not yet. I didn't know what was waiting for me once I got there. Would Jenny follow me? Would she even come home after what had just happened? Did she feel any remorse? The thought of seeing her again, knowing what I knew now, made me sick. So I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, my mind spinning with everything I'd seen. How long had this been going on? How many men had she been with? Was there something deeper behind it? I kept replaying the moment she froze when I took off the mask, the look of pure shock on her face. But was she shocked that I caught her, or that it was me sitting in that room? Finally, after what felt like hours, I drove home. The house felt empty, even before I walked through the door. The whole time I was driving, I expected to find Jenny sitting in the living room, ready to explain herself. Or maybe she'd be packing a bag, knowing there was no way to come back from this. But when I got home, the house was quiet. Dark. There were no signs that she had returned yet. I don't know why, but the silence felt even worse than a confrontation would have. It was like she was still out there, avoiding the reality of what had just happened, just like she'd been avoiding me for months. I didn't know what to do with myself. I couldn't sleep, couldn't sit still, couldn't even think straight. Every corner of the house reminded me of her, of us, of the life I thought we were building together. It was like everything around me was mocking me, telling me that none of it had ever been real. Finally, after hours of pacing, I heard the door. It was Jenny. She walked in quietly, her face pale, her eyes red like she'd been crying the whole way home. She stood there, barely able to look at me, and for the first time in years, I saw her as a stranger. I didn't even recognize the woman standing in front of me. We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity. She opened her mouth, like she was about to say something, but no words came out. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I wasn't going to ask why or how long. I just stood there, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't think you'd ever find out." That was it. That's all she said. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I made a mistake." Just that she didn't expect to get caught. That cut deeper than anything else. She wasn't sorry about what she'd done, she was sorry that she couldn't keep living this double life anymore. I felt my chest tighten, and before I could even think about what I was saying, the words came out. "How long, Jenny?" Her eyes filled with tears again, but she didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence told me everything I needed to know. I clenched my fists, trying to keep it together, trying not to explode. "How long have you been lying to me? How many times have you gone to that bar? How many men?" She looked at the floor, her body shaking. "It's not what you think." I couldn't believe it. Even now, after everything, she was still trying to spin the story, still trying to twist it like she wasn't at fault. "You think I don't know?" I snapped, my voice rising. "I saw you. I was there, Jenny. Do you understand that? I was sitting there, watching you undress for someone you thought was just another random guy. You were about to," I stopped, choking on the words. "You were about to do it, weren't you?" She finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with guilt. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. That was it. That was all she had to say. I couldn't look at her anymore. I turned away, my mind racing with everything I'd seen, everything she wasn't saying. All the times she'd kissed me goodbye, all the times she'd said, "I love you," all the times she'd come home late with a smile on her face, thinking I'd never find out. But I did. And now, there was no going back. The days after I confronted Jenny were a blur. It was like my life had shattered into pieces, and I was just walking through the wreckage, trying to figure out what came next. After everything I'd seen, everything I'd discovered, there was no way we could go back to how things were. The marriage was over, and we both knew it. I didn't even need to say the words. Jenny already knew what was coming. She could feel the weight of her choices hanging over us like a storm that had finally hit. I think part of her was still in shock that I had caught her like that. That the whole web of lies she'd been spinning for who knows how long had come crashing down in a single night. I reached out to a lawyer the morning after. I couldn't sit around anymore, couldn't keep pretending that there was anything left to salvage. We had been married for nearly 10 years, but after everything I'd seen, I realized that a lot of it had been based on lies. And now it was time to untangle myself from the mess she had made. The divorce process itself was a painful blur. You'd think after everything, I'd be ready to rip the Band-Aid off and get it over with, but it was harder than I expected. There's something about putting the final nail in the coffin that makes everything feel so much more real. Signing those papers. It felt like I was admitting to myself that our entire life together had been a farce. Jenny, she was upset, but she was hiding it. I could see it in her eyes, though. That crack in her facade. She acted like she was ready for it, like she had accepted her fate, but every once in a while, her voice would break, and I'd catch a glimpse of the pain she didn't want me to see. She wasn't the Jenny I knew anymore. Or maybe, I was finally seeing her for who she really was. When we met to go over the details with our lawyers, she kept her head held high, like she was trying to show me that she was strong, that she was in control of the situation. But every time she thought no one was looking, I saw the tension in her jaw, the way her hands trembled when she signed the papers. She may not have shown it outright, but I could tell this wasn't how she thought things would end. "Do you have anything to say, Jenny?" I asked her, just once, after we'd gone over the terms. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes glassy, but her lips stayed tight. There was a flash of something, maybe regret, maybe sadness, but she swallowed it back down. "No," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I guess there's nothing left to say." That was it. After everything we had been through, after all the lies, the betrayal, the secrets, it ended with that one word. Nothing. It should have made me angry. I should have felt rage, or at least some kind of satisfaction that I was finally breaking free from her, but all I felt was this heavy, hollow emptiness. Like I had lost something I couldn't get back, even though it was never real to begin with. When the day came to finalize the divorce, we both showed up at the courthouse. She looked the same as she always did, polished, put together, like nothing could shake her. But I knew better. I knew what was underneath. We didn't speak much. Just sat in silence as the judge went through the motions. I could feel the distance between us, a chasm that had grown over the years, only now I could see it for what it really was. And when it was done, when the papers were signed and the judge declared our marriage officially over, Jenny stood up and walked out of the room without looking back. I watched her leave, and for the first time, I realized that it wasn't just my marriage that was over, it was the life I thought I'd had. All those years, all those moments, they were tainted now. Nothing would ever feel the same again. After the divorce, we didn't talk. There was no point. I think we both knew there was nothing left to say, and that was the hardest part. The silence between us was louder than any argument or fight could have been. But the truth is, even though I'm free from her now, I'm not sure I'll ever be free from the damage she left behind. After the papers were signed and the weight of the divorce was officially off my shoulders, my friends kept telling me I needed to celebrate the end of my marriage. They said it like I was supposed to feel relieved, like I'd just been released from some kind of prison. And maybe I had, but it didn't feel like freedom. It felt more like stepping into the unknown, a place I wasn't sure I wanted to be. But they wouldn't take no for an answer. Mike, who had been there through all of this, was the one leading the charge. He convinced me that going out, having a few drinks, and letting loose was exactly what I needed to close this chapter of my life. So, I agreed. A few nights after the divorce was finalized, Mike, along with a couple of our other friends, dragged me out to one of our old spots. It wasn't the bar where I had caught Jenny, God, no. I couldn't handle going anywhere near that place. This one was more laid back, the kind of bar where we used to hang out before life got so complicated. I guess Mike thought taking me back to simpler times would help me forget everything that had happened, at least for one night. The minute we walked in, the lights and the noise hit me like a wall. There was a buzz of energy, people laughing, music playing, glasses clinking. It felt like the world was moving on, like life was still going, even though mine had completely fallen apart. Mike slapped me on the back, grinning like an idiot. Tonight's about you, man. No thinking about the past. You're a free man now. I tried to smile, but it came out weak. The truth was, I didn't feel free. I felt like I'd lost something, and I wasn't sure what to do with the empty space it had left behind. But I went along with it, downing my first drink a little too quickly just to feel the burn of alcohol distract me from everything in my head. The guys were in full celebration mode, ordering rounds of shots, cracking jokes, talking about how now was my time to get back out there. They made it sound like I'd just been benched for a while and now I was being thrown back into the game. But dating was the last thing on my mind. I could barely wrap my head around the fact that I just ended a decade-long marriage. The thought of starting over with someone new. It felt impossible. But I didn't tell them that. I just nodded, forced a laugh when I needed to, and kept the drinks coming. I guess part of me thought if I got drunk enough, I could push all the memories of Jenny and what she'd done out of my mind, at least for one night. At one point, Mike leaned in, clearly already buzzed. You know, man, Jenny was holding you back. You'll see it soon enough. This divorce? It's the best thing that could have happened. I didn't say anything. What was the point? Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd look back on this years from now and realize I was better off. But standing there, with a glass in my hand and my marriage in ruins, I didn't feel like I was better off. I just felt lost. The night went on, the drinks kept flowing, and the guys started to loosen up, laughing and joking around. They were trying to keep things light, trying to make me feel like everything was going to be okay. And for a few hours, it almost worked. I almost forgot about the mess I had just walked away from. But then, out of nowhere, the bartender put a shot in front of me, even though I hadn't ordered it. It's on the house, she said, giving me a smile. Heard you just got divorced. Thought you could use this. I couldn't help but laugh a little. Word gets around, I guess. I took the shot and threw it back, feeling the burn in my throat, and for the first time that night, something inside me loosened. Maybe this really was a fresh start. Maybe this was the moment where I let go of everything and started living for myself again. As the night wore on, we drank more, laughed more, and for a little while, I actually felt lighter. Like maybe there was a chance for me to move forward, to find some kind of peace in all of this chaos. But there was also this undercurrent of something I couldn't shake. A nagging thought that no matter how much I tried to drown it with drinks, the hurt, the betrayal, and the lies would still be there waiting for me when the night was over. We stayed at the bar until closing, and by the time we stumbled out into the street, my head was buzzing, but I wasn't drunk enough to forget. Not completely. Mike threw his arm around me, half laughing, half serious. "This is it, man. A new beginning. You're gonna be all right." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if I believed him. But at least for that night, with my friends by my side and the taste of alcohol still burning in my throat, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The days after that night out with my friends were quiet. It was like the world had finally slowed down, giving me a chance to catch my breath. The divorce was over. The papers were signed. The nightmare that was my marriage had finally come to an end. I won't lie, there were still moments when the pain hit me. I'd wake up in the morning and, for just a split second, forget that my life had been flipped upside down. But then, reality would sink in, and I'd remember everything. The betrayal. The lies. The woman I thought I knew turning out to be someone else entirely. But over time, something strange happened. I stopped caring. At first, it was little things. Like when I'd come home and realize I didn't need to feel that heavy dread in my chest anymore. I didn't need to wonder where Jenny was or who she was with. That constant knot of anxiety started to loosen, and for the first time in months, I started feeling a little more like myself again. I wasn't checking her social media anymore. I wasn't thinking about what she was doing or who she was with. It was like she'd been slowly fading into the background of my life, just another chapter that I had finally closed. And then one day, I found out something that would have wrecked me before. But when I heard it, I realized just how far I'd come. Mike, ever the gossip, had heard through the grapevine that Jenny was still working at that bar. The same place where I'd caught her, where I'd seen her dancing for strangers like it was all just a game. "You're not gonna believe this, man," Mike said when he called me. "She's still there. Same routine, same everything." I paused for a second, letting it sink in. But the truth was, it didn't sting like I thought it would. I didn't feel that sharp jab of betrayal or the rage bubbling up inside me. I just didn't care. I shrugged, even though he couldn't see it over the phone. "Doesn't matter." Mike sounded confused. "Seriously? That doesn't bother you?" "I mean, after everything, I figured you'd want to know." "I appreciate you telling me," I said, meaning it. "But it doesn't bother me anymore. She can do whatever she wants. She's not my problem." And that was the truth. The thing is, I had spent so long being consumed by her lies, her actions, and the betrayal that I forgot what it felt like to focus on me. On what I wanted out of life. On what actually mattered. But standing there, holding my phone, hearing that Jenny was still wrapped up in that world, it hit me that none of it was my concern anymore. She wasn't part of my life. She was just a ghost of something that used to be. Jenny could keep doing whatever she was doing at that bar, but I was free. Truly free. I didn't have to watch from the shadows, didn't have to wonder what she was hiding anymore. I had my life back, and I wasn't going to waste it thinking about her. That was the moment I realized I had finally let her go. And that's it, I guess. The story's over. There's not much more to say except this: if you're going through something like this, if you feel like you'll never get past the betrayal, the lies, the hurt, trust me, you will. One day, you'll wake up, and the weight of it all will be gone. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. And when it does, you'll look back and wonder why you ever let it consume you in the first place. For me, Jenny's just a part of my past now. A lesson learned. And as for the future, I'm not sure what's next. But for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. It helped to write it all down, to get it out there. And if my experience helps anyone else going through something similar, then maybe it was all worth it in the end.